Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books, right here in the live studios in Hythe, Kent, Southeast England, just near the English Channel, translated into Anglo-Saxon. Hythe means haven. So here we are in the haven, trying to continue without stop transmitting the sound of Srila Prabhupada's books straight, cover to cover, to the world. Glad to have you with us. Please tell your friends and anyone else who's is interested in searching for the absolute truth. Hare Krishna. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Mahima Stotram from Sri Krishna Lila Stava by Srila Sanatana Goswami explains exactly why we're doing what we're doing. It goes like this. Sarva Shastabdi Piyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnaja Sarva Lokaika Drik Prada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Purāṇa Śrīmad-Bhāgavata Prabho Kalidwandodidaditya Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life, heir of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad-Bhāgavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshakshadayate Sarvada Sarvasevyaya Sri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you who are supremely blissful to read. Shall I read that again? I bow down to you who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguru Man Mahadana Man Nisdadaga Mad Bhagya Mad Anandana Mostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy. I bow down to you. Asadu sadutadayin atini chochata kada hanamunta kadachin mam premna rit kanta yokspura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, we first of all want to welcome our honored guest, Radharaman Prabhu. He has many titles to his name. One of them is the Prince of Hythe. The other is VP of London Temple. Hare Krishna. And a very dear friend, by the way. Hare Krishna. All right. We're in the middle of a purport describing who came to see Bhīṣmadeva pass away. And so right in the middle of the purport, please don't mind. It's right, the first words of the paragraph are Parashuram or Renukasura. Parashuram or Renukasuta. He is the son of Maharshi Jamadagni and Srimati Renuka. Thus he is known as Renuka Sutta. He is one of the powerful incarnations of God, and he killed the Kshatriya community as a whole 21 times. With the blood of the Kshatriyas, he pleased the souls of his forefathers. Later on, he underwent severe penances at the Mahendra Parvata. After taking the whole earth from the Kshatriyas, he gave it in charity to Kashyapa Muni. Parashuram instructed the Dhanurveda, or the science of fighting, to Dronacharya, because he happened to be a Brahmana. He was present during the coronation of Maharaj Yudhishthir, and he celebrated the function along with other great rishis. Parashuram is so old that he met both Rama and Krishna at different times. He fought with Rama, but he accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He also praised Arjuna when he saw him with Krishna. When Bhīṣma refused to marry Amba, who wanted him to become her husband, Amba met Parashuram, and by her request only, he asked Bhīṣmadeva to accept her as his wife. Bhīṣma refused to obey his order, although he was one of the spiritual masters of Bhīṣmadeva. Parashuram fought with Bhīṣmadeva when Bhīṣma neglected his warning. Both of them fought very severely, and at last Parashuram was pleased with Bhīṣma and gave him the benediction of becoming the greatest fighter in the world. Vasishta, the great celebrated sage among the Brahmanas, well known as the Brahmarshi Vashishthadev. He is a prominent figure in both the Ramayana and Mahabharata periods. He celebrated the coronation ceremony of the personality of Godhead, Sri Rama. He was present also on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. He could approach the higher and lower planets, and his name is also connected with the history of Hiranyakashipu. There was a great tension between him and Vishwamrita, who wanted his Kamadhenu, wish-fulfilling cow. Vasishta Muni refused to spare his Kamadhenu, and for this Vishwamrita killed his 100 sons. As a perfect Brahmana, he tolerated all the taunts of Vishwamrita. Once he tried to commit suicide on account of Vishwamrita's torture, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. He jumped from a hill, but the stones on which he fell became a stack of cotton, and thus he was saved. He jumped into the ocean, but the waves washed him ashore. He jumped into the river, but the river also washed him ashore. Thus all his suicide attempts were unsuccessful. He is one of the 7 rishis and the husband of Arundhati, the famous star. Indrapramada, another celebrated rishi. Trita, one of the 3 sons of Prajapati Gautama. He was the 3rd son, and his other 2 brothers were known as Ekat and Dvita. All the brothers were great sages and strict followers of the principles of religion. By dint of severe penances, they were promoted to Brahmaloka, the planet where Brahmaji lives. Once Trita Muni fell into a well. He was an organizing worker of many sacrifices, and as one of the great sages, he also came to show respect to Bhīṣmaji, at his deathbed. He was one of the 7 sages of the Varunaloka. He hailed from the western countries of the world. As such, most probably, he belonged to the European countries. At that time, the whole world was under one Vedic culture. Gritsamada, one of the sages of the heavenly kingdom. He was a close friend of Indra, the king of heaven, and was as great as Brihaspati. He used to visit the royal assembly of Maharaj Yudhishthir, and he also visited the place where Bhīṣmadeva breathed his last. Sometimes he explained the glories of Lord Shiva before Maharaj Yudhishthir. He was the son of Vitahabhya, and he resembled in features the body of Indra. Sometimes the enemies of Indra mistook him to be Indra and arrested him. He was a great scholar of the Rig Veda, and thus he was highly respected by the Brahmana community. He lived a life of celibacy and was powerful in every respect. Asita. There was a king of the same name, but herein the Asita mentioned is the Asita Devala Rishi, a great powerful sage of the time. He explained to his father 1,500,000 verses from the Mahabharata. He was one of the members of the snake sacrifice of Maharaj Janamejaya. He was also present during the coronation ceremony of Maharaj Yudhishthir, along with other great rishis. He also gave Maharaj Yudhishthir instructions while he was on the Anjana hill. He was also one of the devotees of Lord Shiva. Kakshivan, one of the sons of Gautama Muni and the father of the great sage Chandakoshika. He was one of the members of the parliament of Maharaj Yudhishthir. Atri. Atri Muni was a great Brahmana sage and was one of the mental sons of Brahmaji. Brahmaji is so powerful that simply by thinking of a son, he can have it. These sons are known as Manasa Putras. Out of 7 Manasa Putras of Brahmaji, and out of the 7 great Brahmana sages, Atri is one. In his family, the great Prachetas were also born. Atri Muni had 2 Kshatriya sons who became kings. Artama was one of them. Atri is counted as one of the 21 Prajapatis. His wife's name was Anasuya, and he helped Maharaj Parikshit in his great sacrifices. Kaushika, one of the permanent rishi members in the royal assembly of Maharaj Yudhishthir. He sometimes met Lord Krishna. There are several other sages of the same name. Sudarshana, this wheel, which is accepted by the personality of Godhead, Vishnu or Krishna, as his personal weapon, is the most powerful weapon, greater than the Brahmastras or similar other disastrous weapons. In some of the Vedic literatures, it is said that Agni Dev, the fire god, presented this weapon to Lord Sri Krishna, but factually, this weapon is eternally carried by the Lord. Agni Dev presented this weapon to Krishna in the same way that Rukmini was given by Maharaj Rukma to the Lord. The Lord accepts such presentations from his devotees, even though such presentations are eternally his property. There is an elaborate description of this weapon in the Adi Parva of the Mahabharata. Lord Sri Krishna used this weapon to kill Shishupal, a rival of the Lord. He also killed Shalva by this weapon, and sometimes he wanted his friend Arjuna to use it to kill his enemies. Mahabharata, Virata Parva, 56:3. Text 8. And many others, like Shukadev Goswami and other purified souls, Kashyapa and Angirasa, and others, all accompanied by their respective disciples, arrived there. Purport. Shukadev Goswami, Brahmarata, the famous son and disciple of Sri Vyasadeva, who taught him first the Mahabharata and then Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Shukadeva Goswami recited 1,400,000 verses of the Mahabharata in the councils of the Gandharvas, Yakshas, and Rakshasas. Whoa! And he recited Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam for the first time in the presence of Maharaj Parikshit. He thoroughly studied all the Vedic literatures from his great father. Thus he was a completely purified soul by dint of his extensive knowledge in the principles of religion. From the Mahabharata, Sabhaparva 411, it is understood that he was also present in the royal assembly of Maharaj Yudhishthir and at the fasting of Maharaj Parikshit. As a bona fide disciple of Sri Vyasadeva, he inquired from his father very extensively about religious principles and spiritual values, and his great father also satisfied him by teaching him the yoga system by which one can attain the spiritual kingdom. The difference between fruitive work and empiric knowledge, the ways and means of attaining spiritual realization, the four ashramas, namely the student life, the householder's life, the retired life, and the renounced life. The sublime position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the process of seeing Him face to face, the bona fide candidate for receiving knowledge, the consideration of the 5 elements, the unique position of intelligence, the consciousness of the material nature and the living entity, the symptoms of the self-realized soul, the working principles of the material body, the symptoms of the influential modes of nature, the tree of perpetual desire, and psychic activities. That's one sentence. Hare Krishna. Sometimes he went to the sun planet with the permission of his father and Naradaji. Descriptions of his travel in space are given in the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata, 332. He at last attained the transcendental realm. He is known by different names, like Araneya, Arunisutta, Vyasaki, and Vyasatmaja. That was all about Shukadeva Goswami. Kashyapa, one of the Prajapatis, the son of Marichi, and one of the sons-in-law of Prajapati Daksha. He is the father of the gigantic bird Garuda, who was given elephants and tortoises as eatables. He married 13 daughters of Prajapati Daksha, and their names are Aditi, Danu, Kashta, Arishta, Surasa, Muni, Ila, Muni, Krodavaswa, Krodavasa, Tamra, Surabhi, Sarama, and Timi. He begot many children, both demigods and demons, by those wives. From his first wife, Aditi, all the 12 Adityas were born. One of them is Vamana, the incarnation of Godhead. This great sage Kashyapa was also present at the time of Arjuna's birth. He received a presentation of the whole world from Parashuram, and later on he asked Parashuram to go out of the world. His other name is Arishtanemi. He lives on the northern side of the universe. Angirasa. He is the son of Maharaj Angira and is known as Brihaspati, the priest of the demigods. It is said that Dronacharya was his partial incarnation. Shukracharya was the spiritual master of the demons and Brihaspati challenged him. His son is Kacha, and he delivered the fire weapon first to Bharadwaj Muni. He begot 6 sons, like the fire god, by his wife Chandamasi, one of the reputed stars. He could travel in space, and therefore he could present himself even in the planets of Brahmaloka and Indraloka. He advised the king of heaven, Indra, about conquering the demons. Once he cursed Indra, who thus had to become a hog on the earth and was unwilling to return to heaven. Such is the power of the attraction of the illusory energy. Even a hog does not wish to part with its earthly possessions in exchange for a heavenly kingdom. He was the religious preceptor of the natives of different planets. Text 9. Bhīṣmadeva, who was the best amongst the 8 Vasus, received and welcomed all the great and powerful rishis who were assembled there, for he knew perfectly all the religious principles according to time and space. He greeted them all, even though he was on a bed of arrows. Purport. Expert religionists know perfectly well how to adjust religious principles in terms of time and place. All the great acharyas, or religious preachers or reformers of the world, executed their mission by adjustment of religious principles in terms of time and place. There are different climates and situations in different parts of the world, and if one has to discharge his duties to preach the message of the Lord, he must be expert in adjusting things in terms of the time and place. Bhīṣmadeva was one of the 12 great authorities in preaching this cult of devotional service, and therefore he could receive and welcome all the powerful sages assembled there at his deathbed from all parts of the universe. He was certainly unable at that time to welcome and receive them physically, because he was neither at his home nor in a normal healthy condition. But he was quite fit by the activities of his sound mind, and therefore he could utter sweet words with hearty expressions, and all of them were well received. One can perform one's duty by physical work, by mind, and by words, and he knew well how to utilize them in the proper place, and therefore there was no difficulty for him to receive them, although physically unfit. Text 10. Lord Sri Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, yet he manifests his transcendental form by his internal potency. This very Lord was sitting before Bhīṣmadeva, and since Bhīṣmadeva knew of his glories, he worshipped him duly. Purport. The Lord's omnipotency is displayed by his simultaneous presence in every place. He is present always in his eternal abode, Goloka Vrindavan. And still, he is present in everyone's heart, and even within every invisible atom. When he manifests his eternal transcendental form in the material world, he does so by his internal potency. The external potency, or the material energy, has nothing to do with his eternal form. All these truths were known to Sri Bhīṣmadeva, who worshipped him accordingly. Text 11. The sons of Maharaj Pandu were sitting silently nearby, overtaken with affection for their dying grandfather. Seeing this, Bhīṣmadeva congratulated them with feeling. There were tears of ecstasy in his eyes, for he was overwhelmed by love and affection. Purport. When Maharaj Pandu died, his sons were all small children, and naturally they were brought up under the affection of elderly members of the royal family, specifically by Bhīṣmadeva. Later on, when the Pandavas were grown up, they were cheated by cunning Duryodhana and company, and Bhīṣmadeva, although he knew that the Pandavas were innocent and were unnecessarily put into trouble, could not take the side of the Pandavas for political reasons. At the last stage of his life, when Bhīṣmadeva saw his most exalted grandsons, headed by Maharaj Yudhishthira, sitting very gently at his side, the great warrior grandfather could not check his loving tears, which were automatically flowing from his eyes. He remembered the great tribulations suffered by his most pious grandsons. Certainly, he was the most satisfied man, because of Yudhishthira's being enthroned in place of Duryodhana, and thus he began to congratulate them. Text 12. Bhīṣmadeva said, "Oh, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls had to suffer for being the sons of religion personified. You did not deserve to remain alive under those tribulations, yet you were protected by the Brahmanas, God, and religion." Purport. Maharaj Yudhishthira was disturbed due to the great massacre in the battle of Kurukshetra. Bhīṣmadeva could understand this, and therefore he spoke first of the terrible sufferings of Maharaj Yudhishthira. He was put into difficulty by injustice only, and the battle of Kurukshetra was fought just to counteract this injustice. Therefore, he should not regret the great massacre. He wanted to point out particularly that they were always protected by the Brahmanas, the Lord, and religious principles. As long as they were protected by these three important items, there was no cause of disappointment. Thus Bhīṣmadeva encouraged Maharaj Yudhishthira to dissipate his despondency. As long as a person is fully in cooperation with the wishes of the Lord, guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, and strictly following religious principles, one has no cause for despondency, however trying the circumstances of life. Bhīṣmadeva, as one of the authorities in the line, wanted to impress this point upon the Pandavas. Text 13. As far as my daughter-in-law Kunti is concerned, upon the great General Pandu's death, she became a widow with many children, and therefore she suffered greatly. And when you were grown up, she suffered a great deal also because of your actions. Purport. The sufferings of Kunti Devi were doubly lamented. She suffered greatly because of early widowhood and to get her minor children brought up in the royal family. And when her children were grown up, she continued to suffer because of her son's actions. So her sufferings continued. This means that she was destined to suffer by providence, and this one has to tolerate without being disturbed. Text 14. In my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time, under whose control everyone in every planet is carried, just as the clouds are carried by the wind. Purport. There is control by time all over the space within the universe, as there is control by time all over the planets. All the big gigantic planets, including the sun, are being controlled by the force of air, as the clouds are carried by the force of air. Similarly, the inevitable kala, or time, controls even the action of the air and other elements. Therefore, everything is controlled by the supreme kala, a forceful representative of the Lord within the material world. Thus Yudhishthira should not be sorry about the inconceivable action of time. Everyone has to bear the actions and reactions of time as long as one is within the conditions of the material world. Yudhishthira should not think that he had committed sins in his previous birth and is suffering the consequence. Even the most pious man has to suffer the condition of material nature. But a pious man is faithful to the Lord, for he is guided by the bona fide Brahmana and Vaishnava, following the religious principles. These three guiding principles should be the aim of life. One should not be disturbed by the tricks of eternal time. Even the great controller of the universe, Brahmaji, is also under the control of that time. Therefore, one should not grudge being thus controlled by time, despite being a true follower of religious principles. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Oh, how wonderful is the influence of inevitable time. Otherwise, how can there be reverses in the presence of King Yudhishthira, the son of the demigod controlling religion? Bhima, the great fighter with the club, the great bowman, Arjuna with his mighty weapon Gandiva, and above all, the Lord, the direct well-wisher of the Pandavas. Purport. As far as the material or spiritual resources were required, there was no scarcity in the case of the Pandavas. Materially, they were well equipped because two great warriors, namely Bhima and Arjuna, were there. Spiritually, the king himself was the symbol of religion, and above all, the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, was personally concerned with their affairs and as the well-wisher. And yet, there were so many reverses on the side of the Pandavas. Despite the power of pious acts, the power of personalities, the power of expert management, and the power of weapons under the direct supervision of Lord Krishna, the Pandavas suffered so many practical reverses, which can only be explained as due to the influence of Kala, inevitable time. Kala is identical with the Lord himself, and therefore the influence of Kala indicates the inexplicable wish of the Lord himself. There is nothing to be lamented when a matter is beyond the control of any human being. Shall I repeat that? You wouldn't mind? Okay. There is nothing to be lamented when a matter is beyond the control of any human being. Text 16. O King, no one can know the plan of the Lord, Sri Krishna. Even though great philosophers inquire exhaustively, they are bewildered. Purport. The bewilderment of Maharaj Yudhishthira over his past sinful acts and the resultant sufferings and so on is completely negated by the great authority Bhīṣma, one of the 12 authorized persons. Bhīṣma wanted to impress upon Maharaj Yudhishthira that since time immemorial, no one, including such demigods as Shiva and Brahma, could ascertain the real plan of the Lord. And so what can we understand about it? It is useless also to inquire about it. Even the exhaustive philosophical inquiries of sages cannot ascertain the plan of the Lord. The best policy is to abide by the orders of the Lord without argument. The sufferings of the Pandavas were never due to their past deeds. The Lord had to execute the plan of establishing the kingdom of virtue, and therefore his own devotees suffered temporarily in order to establish the conquest of virtue. Bhīṣmadeva was certainly satisfied by seeing the triumph of virtue, and he was glad to see King Yudhishthira on the throne, although he himself fought against him. Even a great fighter like Bhīṣma could not win the battle of Kurukshetra because the Lord wanted to show that vice cannot conquer virtue, regardless of who tries to execute it. Bhīṣmadeva was a great devotee of the Lord, but he chose to fight against the Pandavas by the will of the Lord, because the Lord wanted to show that a fighter like Bhīṣma cannot win on the wrong side. Oh, it's so beautiful. So beautiful. Okay, we'll stop here. That's 7:46.
Wow, really?
Yeah. We'll start tomorrow with text 17. And so, we ask all the sages present, wherever they are, to please share with us their reflections on what we just read. Hare Krishna. Be our guest. Who? Radha-Raman. It's about time.
Thank you, Maharaj. I just wanted to reflect back to you one passage that you really seemed to take note of, which was at the end of verse 12 purport, and I wonder if you would like to make some further comment. It says, thus Bhīṣmadeva encouraged Maharaj Yudhisthira to dissipate his despondency. As long as a person is fully in cooperation with the wishes of the Lord, guided by the bona fide Brahmins and Vaishnavas, and strictly following religious principles, one has no cause for despondency, however trying the circumstances of life. Bhīṣmadeva, as one of the authorities in the line, wanted to impress this point upon the Pandavas.
Yeah, because we have no reason for despondency, because by the grace of the Super Soul, we have been given access to the association of these great souls. And we've heard just in this reading some details of the lives of many great souls. Everyone who came to see Bhīṣmadeva, not everyone, but many who came to see Bhīṣmadeva. And each one of those personalities, just the sounds of their names actually uplifts us and protects us against the effects of Maya. And therefore, no matter what happens to us, we have actually no reason to lament about anything. But sometimes when a great soul becomes a world acharya, then they're forced by their compassion for seeing the sufferings of the common people who are ignorant. They will take up trials and tribulations, or efforts that cause, by nature, trials and tribulations, just to show how to do it. So, but this idea that we don't have anything to lament about, even though we have so many tasks that seem sometimes impossible, or obstacles that prevent us from doing our mission for the spiritual master and for the Lord. When Prabhupada came to London for the last time, there's an actual recording of his strong chastisement of the leaders of India. He actually called them, what would he call it? I have to remember this name. I'm old now, I can't remember. My memory is not so well, but nasty. He used this word nasty a few times, just in a very short, because he was his health was down then. I don't know how Tamal Krishna Maharaj managed to get him from Vrindavan to London and back, but it was a miracle. Glory to his service.
That's in 76?
77.
77.
That was not just 77, that was at the end of...
Way at the end, huh?
Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada was going on and on about how these leaders of India put obstacles in his step. At every step, they tried to stop him or, create obstacles to make it difficult for him, and he was so disgusted. He actually said, I don't want to go back to India. Of course, he went back to India because Vrindavan is not India. It's his home. But, yeah. So even great souls sometimes do lament about those things, but out of compassion for the fallen souls. Hare Krishna. Haribol.
Bhakta Jason says Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Bhakta Jason, in Dallas.
And Francis Derbyshire.
Francis Derbyshire. I wonder if there's another name. Do you remember? Any idea? Anyway, welcome aboard.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. You too.
And Rati Manjari.
Haribol Rati.
She says, Jai Guru Maharaj, the transcendental hour.
That's a good name. That's a good name for it. The transcendental hour.
Thank God it's Friday.
Thank God it's Friday.
Sudevi Dasi says Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Haribol Sudevi Dasi.
And from Gopakanya Devi Dasi.
Haribol Gopakanya Devi Dasi.
Hare Krishna, dear Maharaj, thank you for always welcoming us to hear from you this divine daily reading service of Srila Prabhupada's books. Blessed to give my ears to hear you, Maharaj, to wash my contaminated consciousness and get purified day by day. Thank you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. All glories to the transcendental sound of Srila Prabhupada's books. Thank you.
And a question from Bhakta Jason.
Question from Bhakta Jason. Okay.
He says, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Which translation of Mahabharata do you recommend to read?
Well, as far as I know, there's no real perfect translation of the Mahabharata. It's been altered a lot of times from a lot of people. There's one that Srila Prabhupada said wasn't too off, and it was, I have the set in my room in Govardhan. It's Datta, something Dutt. I can't remember the full name of the author, but it's about a 7 or 8 volume set. There's no commentaries, it's just the verses translated. Other than that, I can't say. I always, when I hear about and see devotees who get really absorbed in the Mahabharata and they get absorbed in the stories and everything. I always think, well, there's enough of the Mahabharata in this Bhagavatam, as we've already heard just the last few days, that we don't really need to read the Mahabharata. There's so many details. The Bhīṣmadeva's instructions are 360 chapters. That's as many chapters as there are in the whole Bhagavatam. Yeah. So we get the essence of all of the literatures in the Bhagavatam. Nigabhakāpataror galitam palam. We don't really need to read any other books outside of Srila Prabhupada's books, although sometimes in his books he does recommend that we read certain things like the commentaries of our previous acharyas, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. He said we must read that book. In the Adi Lila, chapter 5, verse 203, I believe it was. And Satsandarbhas for serious students. He said it would do them well to go through the Satsandarbhas. But in general, Gopi Pranadana Prabhu taught it, and also Srila Prabhupada mentioned that we should first assimilate what he has given us before we try to enter into other literatures, bona fide literatures. So I don't know about anybody else, but when the day comes that I have assimilated the Chaitanya Charitamrita and the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and Gita into my consciousness, then that's the day that I'll get absorbed in other things. But that I don't see that happening anytime soon. It's just safe. Frankly, I think it's safe to stick with Srila Prabhupada's books, especially for most devotees. There may be some devotees or frontline preachers in some areas of the world, India especially, that they need to know details and arguments and things like that you find in other literatures. But everything that we need is there in Srila Prabhupada's books. I'm convinced. Hare Krishna.
And from Rati Manjari.
Haribo Rati.
Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. I found tonight's reading was filled with meaningful information, which was also practical for use for us in our daily lives. For example, how Srila Prabhupada elaborated on inevitable time, and how we should not resent that we are controlled by it, no matter who we are. I thought how different that is to all the courses on time management by all the business gurus of today.
That's a good point. Very good point. Maybe you should make a recommendation to the educational minister. Hare Krishna Rati, thank you. That was beautiful.
And from Vrajaloka.
Vrajaloka, Haribol.
Hare Krishna, dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to you and all the present sages. Thank you so much for your super encouraging comment.
My pleasure. Pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
And from Gauranga Gopal.
Gauranga Gopal, our hero. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much for reading this ecstatic part of the Bhagavatam. I particularly enjoyed hearing the little summary of each great personalities attending Bhīṣmadeva's passing away. I want to learn more about each of them now. I also have one question. Why didn't Bhīṣmadeva say anything when Draupadi got disrobed? Because like Vidura, He usually always told the truth to Dhritarashtra and always tried to convince him to let the Pandavas go on the throne. I think I heard Prabhupada say in a purport in Bhagavad Gita that it has to do with financial reasons. Obviously, it was the plan of Krishna.
You just answered your own question. Thank you. It was Krishna's will. And he's a brahmachari. He's a kshatriya and he's a brahmachari. And he made certain vows. And one of the vows that he made was when a brahmachari is maintained by someone, then they're duty-bound to support that person no matter what. But this was the will of Krishna, so that this could occur. When all these sages and Yudhishthira and everyone got to hear what Bhīṣma had to say. And as I already said, what he had to say was a lot. 360 chapters of the Mahabharata are dedicated to the teachings of Bhīṣmadeva to Yudhishthira. 360 chapters. So, for all those reasons, Bhīṣma played a role in Krishna's pastimes. And as we said, as Prabhupada already explained it, that just to show that even the greatest warrior, and he was the greatest warrior, there was no way that Arjuna could defeat Bhīṣma unless it was the will of the Lord to show that even Bhīṣma could not win on the wrong side. And Bhīṣmadeva was appreciating it. Therefore tears were flowing from his eyes when he was talking about the Pandavas and to the Pandavas. These are all inconceivable pastimes of Krishna. So we don't need to lament, as we heard just tonight, eternal time, providence, eternal time, providential events. They're all being directed by Krishna. So we really don't have anything to lament about. Hare Krishna. That's how we become free.
And from Anandamurti Devidasi.
Anandamurti Devidasi, Hare Krishna.
Dear Guru
The star
Maharaj,
preacher in Japan, Osaka.
Dear Guru Maharaj and all devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much for today's reading. Today I understand that if we become Krishna conscious, even through all reverses, we can tolerate it. Thank you so much.
Yes, exactly. I was talking to someone just today or yesterday that anyway, I'm repeating myself now. Hare Krishna. Yes, time is that I was repeating. I was saying that in the Bhagavad Gita, there's probably more instructions about that topic than any other. In other words, the duty that we have as devotees to tolerate the influence of material nature and time, the duality of material nature, happiness and distress, loss and gain, fame and infamy, and all these things, they're built into the modes of nature, and you cannot escape them, but you can become uninfluenced by them. Hare Krishna.
Daityari Hari.
Daityari Hari, Haribo.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for tonight's reading. On the point we read about Kunti, quote, she was destined to suffer by providence and this one has to tolerate without being disturbed." Unquote. Really important point. I find myself sometimes frustrated by the limitations of my conditioning, and as a neophyte I equate material advancement and people more endowed with higher capacities to be someone who has Krishna's mercy. Satisfaction in any condition seems like a very attractive quality to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well put and nice reflection.
And the question from Gauranga Gopal.
Gauranga Gopal, Haribol.
Also, what do you think about distributing Mahabharata in the street? I know that Shivaram Maharaj distribute Krishna Dharma's one, or has done it in the past in Hungary.
What do I think about it? I think it's a wonderful idea. I think that Prabhupada wanted the BBT books to be distributed to the public, because it's what funds our movement, or should fund our movement. So if it can be done in a way that helps fund the movement, yes. But like I said before, all the elements of the history of the universe, including the Mahabharata, there in the Bhagavatam, yeah. I think Srila Prabhupada's purports, as exemplified by what we read today, there's enough detail to keep us busy. But like the last time I read this book all the way through, it's been enough time that I can barely remember what I read before. So it's like reading it for the first time. It's ever fresh. Hare Krishna.
And from Rati Manjari.
Haribol Rati.
Also, I liked how Srila Prabhupada described how the great acharyas are able to spread this transcendental knowledge throughout all different times by, if I remember correctly, adjusting the religious principles to time and circumstances. Please correct me if I am wrong.
Well, when you say adjusting religious principles, that's not a good way to say it, because they never deviated from religious principles. They may have adjusted some principles, or what's the word? Minimize some principles or something like that, but they never adjusted religious principles. Religious principles, Christian consciousness is based on the religious principles in the Shastras. So we shouldn't think that because it's the Acharya's duty to adjust things according to time and circumstance, that there's certain things that there's many things that they don't adjust. And basically they are the original religious principles. Krishna is God. God is a person. The absolute truth is a person. His name is Krishna, and all the incarnations of God come from Krishna. These are basic principles. The deity form of Krishna is Krishna. Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra are our sources of knowledge, etc., etc., etc. There may be different adjustments that are made, but the acharyas don't, change the religious principles. They make adjustments according to time and circumstance. Which religious principles are stressed, especially in the beginning of preaching in the West. There were certain things that Prabhupada didn't stress at all. But later on, when the devotees were a little more fixed up and his books had come out, then all the religious principles are there fully in his purports. So yes, the world acharya can make adjustments according to time and circumstance, but it's not that they change religious principles. Hare Krishna.
From Braj Ballabha.
Braj Balaba Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I want to express my appreciation for the time, care, and insights you give us all. How fortunate we are to have you delivering the mail.
Hare Krishna. Well, good thing I can't see it like that, but thanks very much.
And from Vijay Krishna Das.
Vijay Krishna. Hare Krishna.
He says, it's a couple things, I'll read them together. Why do you read Prabhupada's books? What is their importance? Why do you read Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam? What is its importance? Please.
The Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is first of all, I read Prabhupada's books because, as he himself said, they would be the law books for the next 10,000 years. The principles of how to solve our individual and collective problems are given in the Bhagavatam in a language that everyone can understand. You remember in what we say every day, the Sanatana Goswami's glorification of the Bhagavatam, he says, you can always be served by everyone. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. That's why I read the Bhagavatam. And that's why I read Srila Prabhupada's books, because they are empowered to spread Krishna consciousness. And the facts and history speaks for itself. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for your wonderful reflections and discussion on these ecstatic chapters of the first canto of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada's purports. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bo. See you tomorrow night. Same place, same time, same topic. The unlimited Anandam Bodhivardhanam, the ever-expanding ocean of bliss in Srila Prabhupada's books. Hare Krishna. See you tomorrow.